Becca, welcome to the Easy Conversations podcast. Thank you for joining me today. And yeah, no, this
Hey.
is amazing. I really appreciate you coming on and looking forward to everything we're going to get into today, especially around emotions. Talk about this a lot on the podcast, but in general, well, we tend to have this misunderstanding when it comes to emotions, but it could be so overwhelming when we experience them. And I hear so many people that are like, oh, if I figure things out, I just don't want to feel these emotions. But emotions are just a natural way of being. And to be able to have language around it and express it, communicate it, can help us in so many of our relationships, but even in our day to day living when we can sit with some of these emotions and understand why they're coming up because they can play that informational role. And I'm sure we'll get into all of that. But before we do, I do want to give you an opportunity to share with us, the listeners, and myself a little bit about yourself, what's brought you here, and what it is that you're doing.
Sure. And you frame that so well, really, in regard to emotions. And I think, from the get go, most of us growing up were never supported in feeling our emotions. It was always about the grown ups around us and generally speaking, the issues that they were dealing with. And, they liked us as happy, go lucky, sweet, fun, loving kids. But oh man, if you start demonstrating frustration or anger, or depending on the spectrum of where we were growing up, you'd be slapped down or just told to shut up,
Mhm.
or ignored.
Yes.
And so we consequently never really got in touch and learned how we're feeling. In fact, currently I'm teaching a course on the Shift Network, and so many of my students have come forward and said, "Really, emotions? I always thought that what my objective was not to feel them, to the difficult ones, to push them away, so that I didn't have to do that." And in fact, as you well know, it's a balance, right? That New Age, the whole New Age spirituality thing is about. Oh, don't think about these dark negative emotions. Think light. Think positive and always think positive. And when something negative comes up, I remember one teacher years and years ago said, just, give it this and just, or whether you're in a meeting or under a table or something, and push it away. And the fact of the matter is that we can never push them away, maybe for the moment, but
Yeah.
then they will come rushing back.
Mhm.
So my work is about supporting people in identifying and understanding their reactive patterns that are triggering intense emotions and uncontrollable responses. And importantly, we look at the specific triggers that set them off.
Mhm.
So, in other words, I guide people through a process to diminish and eventually replace these reactions with attitudes and feelings and behaviors that align with our highest intentions. But that's not, depending on how much trauma we have been immersed in. And there's a spectrum of trauma, to light trauma to heavy, like I came out of, developmental trauma was a very challenging childhood for me. And it may just take a little while to let go of that. And on the other hand, for me, it can take a long time. There's layers and layers of energy moving through. And I've come from a Western modality. I am trained as a clinical nutritionist. So I'm a clinician, but also I'm trained in this work called emotional liberation that hails from a yogic science perspective. And we pull in a lot of components from that. And at the same time, honoring what science has brought to our attention in regard to emotions. There's not a lot out there, but generally speaking, it is endorsing a lot of the stuff that we have been working with.
Mhm.
And so you ask about my background.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was driven to searching for. I had crippling anxiety and depression and a lot of anger, sadness, And I did a lot of things from Buddhist meditation to Kabbalah, which is the mystical form of Judaism, to countless webinars and retreats and the new age spirituality. I would come out of that and go, okay, I'm going to move forward with these new positive intentions, and then within the day or the hour I was defaulting to these negative neural networks that with the anxiety moving forward. So I was really looking for a lot of years for solutions. And about 10 years ago, I was introduced to this work called emotional liberation, very cutting edge. And at the time, the creator and developer of it, and his name is Mayor Kulsa. Um, I started doing this, and it immediately made a difference, because when you allow, and that's what the whole process is, allowing the difficult emotions to come up. And
Mhm.
while you're doing that, training your nervous system, because it's hard to bring these emotions up. So
Yes.
we're training our nervous system to condition it so that we can allow these emotions to move through and heighten the awareness, so we understand and feel what we're feeling. And when I did that, I was in television news for years and years, and I was an executive producer. And I got to tell you, I just started feeling so much better, and these layers were pulling off, that I said, you know what? I don't want to do this work anymore,
Yeah.
this repertorial and producing work anymore. So I quit my job. I've been working in Chicago at National Public Radio and other television stations as well. And I just said, I felt so awful. And now I feel so good, having gone through this process, that I want to teach this
Yeah.
process. And so I did. I was certified as a clinical nutritionist, a registered dietitian, and but I wanted it. I went into this space where it was so science is concerned, and spirituality, and the ability to discern between the cognitive and the intuitive, and that we can't heal from up here. As you well know, it all comes here. And how do we do that? And this is an incredible portal in order to do that and be in touch with those deep inner resources, the intuition that's connected to our soul.
Mhm. Yes. Well, thank you for all of that. I appreciate you getting into all of this because there's so much to discuss. And I do want to come back to the emotional liberation piece because it'll be very valuable to understand. But coming back to the notion, as you were touching on earlier, that people have this tendency to push the emotions down. Now, what I've observed is they may think that it's being dealt with, or just because it's out of sight, it's out of mind. But that's where you experience, or at least people experience, these situations around numbing or escaping because they're not sitting with the emotion. They're trying to find ways to avoid it. What are your thoughts around that, when on the other extreme, where you're not willing to confront them or sit with them? You're going to do something. Something has to happen. They're going to come out in some way. And as much as you can numb yourself and try to escape, it's not really dealing with the emotion. It's just another way of coping.
Don't you know, Furkan? I mean, most people are going to default to numbing, and whatever that looks like, what if that's alcohol, or that's prescription meds, or drugs, or shopping, or pornography, or whatever, just so they don't have to feel what they're feeling. Now, that's going to be the vast majority of people, but the people who are looking for answers and solutions. And I think those are the people who find their way to us. Yeah. And they're saying, I don't want to live with this anymore. And I understand that you might have a way to help me with it. And so mine is a multidisciplinary approach that actually works with, as I mentioned, Western science, and then the intuitive. And that's yogic science. So it's yogic science versus Western science. and we can talk about that later. But we this work allows us, and we bring in a lot of things, and one of them is practices from the Kundalini tradition. That well, let me back up for a moment and say that these emotions. We work with a palette of 7 difficult emotions, and they include fear and anxiety and depression, anger, sadness, and grief, um, self-doubt, shame and guilt, and neediness, which is a form of desire, and that is the basis for all that we do. We are humans. We have needs that we need met, and so oftentimes we get very confused about meeting our needs because we've never learned to meet our needs, right? The caregiver said, shut up and sit down. And no, I don't want to hear what you need. And so consequently, it gets all screwed up. And we know that we want a loving, respectful, reciprocal relationship. We have no idea how to get it. And
Mhm.
so, because of the anxiety or the anger or whatever, or the sadness, and mostly the sense of worthiness, unworthiness, that I don't deserve this. So what we want to do is we in our work we whip up these emotions through these remarkable Kundalini practices that offer a lot of movement and some breath work, it's not mindfulness meditation. We're not sitting on the cushion and going inward, which is so hard for so many people. I'm finding it's popular. It's the thing that's talked about. But when we have excessively pounding, ruminating thoughts, how can we go inward? So one of the big components of this, one of the big tools in my work is plant medicine.
Mm.
And I work with cannabis or psilocybin microdosing. And what happens is that those earth medicines really can help us settle down. 2 things. They can help us settle down so that we can sit and go inward. And secondly, they amplify the emotion that we want to work with.
Great.
And and I work with so many people who go, I'm numb and I don't feel anything and I want to feel. And so this is really very helpful in reaching in and doing that. So we're stirring up the emotions so that we can bring them up, percolate them up, process them, and release them. And as I say, it depends on the level of trauma that we have. It can take just a short time to do it, or it can take a matter of years to to move those layers off. And the big deal about this for Kent is that, and I'm very careful about this, saying this as a clinician, but it's permanent healing.
Mm.
When we can do that, it's not some uh, lid that you put on that's going to come off in the next little while. And we're seeing that a lot of the times with ketamine and MDMA, where people have to go in and do these sessions, and then 4 to 6 to 8 weeks, they have to go back in again. So it's a constant repetition. What I suggest, and in my work, we go in, we dig it up, and we bring it up so that we can let it go and we can heal.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, well, yeah, I appreciate all of that. So, I do want to come back to the needs that we often don't feel that have been met as children, and which can elicit a lot of shame for people. And I find a lot of the times when you observe that in people, and I think I experienced it too myself, you tend to lack this autonomy and differentiated sense of self. So you see a lot of people then searching for those needs outside of themselves to be met, where you can really connect with yourself and meet your own needs. And then you're more centered and grounded. Do you see a lot of that as well? And it's some of the work you're talking about, whether it's the yogic science and the Kundalini aspect of it, is that it? Like the idea there to sit with yourself and find that centeredness where you can connect to yourself and meet your needs.
Yes. I think it's important to differentiate between Western science and yogic science. And let me think. of science, we go directly to the intellect.
Yes.
And, Western science, it's about systems, usually using scientific instruments and repeated experiments and so forth, and, randomized, double blind,
Yeah.
placebo controlled research. So when we say science, that is what most people think of.
Mhm.
And they're looking for that approach with specific kinds of data and instrumentation. But remember that before there was ever Western science, the world relied on wisdom traditions. And they didn't have science as we know it, and they didn't have scientific instruments. The instrument was consciousness, it was consciousness itself. It was people, often yogis, using repeatable, systematic methodologies of inquiry from within.
Yeah.
And, when you look at the Hindu, the Vedanta, the Buddhism, the Tibetan systems, all these systems have many similarities because truth is truth. And ultimately, we are our own scientist for our own life, for our own existence. And so, using your own inquiry, we call this self therapy in my work. So using your own inquiry to probe into your own consciousness, your subconscious, your superconscious is what I teach people how to do. So our assignment is to find and identify that voice within, that deep inner knowing within your subconscious. And these kinds of teachings can help us find and identify our inner voice so that we can have a dialogue with our deep inner knowing. This is a codified step-by-step way, because for so long I looked and read spiritual texts and spiritual poetry, Rumi, and looking at it, and it was like flowery. And for me, coming from here, and I was all in here, I really wanted something to help me, and I couldn't. What are they saying? And how do I get there? I know what I want, but how do I get there? And this work was so definitive in that way, where it allowed me to do everything in that step-by-step approach.
Mm.
Now, Western science often limits its exploration to the mechanics, right, of how things function, and steering clear of that realm of consciousness. And it provides detailed explanations of processes, but it stopped short of exploring the deeper question of why.
Mhm.
And to fully engage with this inner inquiry, we do need to venture into the domains of consciousness, the transpersonal, whatever you want, the metaphysical, the mystical, because these areas hold the keys to understanding the underlying reasons behind our existence and the universe.
Mhm. Mhm. Yes, I agree. And again, I'm hearing that multidisciplinary look at it as you talked about previously. So not only staying in the cognitive, but going into the intuitive where you're listening to your inner voice. Now, is that kind of the role of the heart as well? So it's you've got your mind and heart. Like, how do you look at it from that perspective? Because a lot of spiritual teachings talk about the role the heart plays in our growth and being able to connect to that. And I don't think a lot of people live within the heart. It's all in the mind.
Because oftentimes people don't know how to do that.
Hmm.
And I would say that the heart has been a symbol. I have my chakra map in the back, and the heart is the fourth chakra, and it's really the chakra wheel that's turning energy. And so we have lots of energy here, and through all the chakras, but in our solar plexus, there's a lot of energy that's held there. Actually, a lot of trauma. Trauma resides in all tissues of the body and the nervous system, but in our system of yogic science, We hold a lot of trauma in layers and layers of, the emotional body, the energetic body. And how do we get into that? And so we are able to drop in and be in touch with this whole area.
Mm,
So just by virtue of getting out of our head and dropping in to our body, we're eventually going to be in touch with our heart.
mhm. Yes. Yeah, and people tend to talk a lot about somatic work and the emotions getting stuck or even feeling the emotions in different parts of our body.
Yes.
There's a lot of somatic work involved there too, and you hear people talking about or reporting chronic pain in different parts of their bodies, but when I have clients bring that up, I ask them to pay attention to it and not just dismiss it as, oh, it's just stiff neck or sore back, but where are you carrying a lot of the stress or where are you carrying a lot of the trauma? And are you paying attention to that? Because people then report talking about getting triggered easily and then reacting to that and not knowing why. It's like, well, the two are connected at times. And the more you, again, we've talked about this, are able to connect with yourself, the more you can recognize where some of these emotions are being held in our body.
Yeah. So that's again what I like about this work, because when we can start identifying emotions, specific emotions, and I work in a framework of where we might study two emotions over an 8 week period, and so then we do I'm sorry, 4 8 week courses, masterclass courses that include trauma also, so that we can become aware of what that feeling is, because what we know about emotions, energy, and motion is that uh, for instance, let's talk about anxiety. Oftentimes, uh, most times, I would suggest emotions don't come singularly. They come in pairs or groups, or in depression, it's a cocktail of emotions. And so, to be able to know what we're feeling and why we're feeling it allows us. It's even a better map to help us connect to the feelings in our body. So if I have a lot of anger, for instance, and I'm doing this work, so often, since the solar plexus is our area of power, and anger is our power, we often misuse it. Most often, we misuse it. But then I can feel it. I'm kind of directed to say, oh yeah, that's what it is. So it really puts a face to these emotions to help us move them through even more efficiently.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, and I think this is probably a good time to dive into the emotional liberation piece because, again, what I'm hearing from you is it is a bit of a process, right? And I think we have to get comfortable with it, and it takes time. And not a lot of people, at least what I've observed, are able to stick with things, right? If they don't see the immediate results, they kind of dismiss it and say it's not for me. And I see this in even in the smallest things, whether it's meditation or yoga, whatever practice they engage in. But what are your thoughts around that, and how does one then work through this emotional liberation piece?
So I want to address what you said earlier about, well, I do yoga or I do meditation, and man, I was there. I mean, I did yoga for a lot of years, and I was supple. My body was supple and sinewy. I looked great.
Mhm,
If I don't say so myself. um, but it didn't do anything for my emotional terrain.
mhm,
In the same way with this meditation, as I said earlier, I tried so hard mindful meditation and to sit and be with it and let things move through. And it was just so hard for me. And I think it's kind of the little secret that we talk about the mindfulness meditation all over. And most people go, well, gee, I need to do that. And there's actually shame associated with it, that I tried to do it and I couldn't do it.
mhm,
Um, so So there is that, because we have a frenetic lifestyle out there for the most part. It's go, 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 run, 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 do this, do that, do this. Now sit down and shut up and meditate.
Mm.
Oh, and I know from my experience, it was next to impossible. So the work that we do, as I say, is very active. Um, there's a lot of movement. There often is a lot of sound. We're not we don't do yoga. Let me just say that, yoga it's a yoke between mind, body, and soul, right? But in our Western view, it really is getting on a mat in its form and flow. Well, this work is not that. We don't do the typical, what Westerners think of as yoga. So we're often sitting, and we're moving through this process with my prompts. So I want to be clear that the prompts around bringing up difficult emotions is far different than prompts that we usually hear in usual meditation, where it can be a visualization where, we're walking along a beach and we're smelling the fresh sea air and watching the waves come in and out and the fluffy white clouds, or whatever that might look like. But if we have this ongoing uh, pressured feeling of whatever it would be, a sense of unworthiness or anxiety or depression, that's the last thing we can do. So in our work, we are actually calling it up and inviting it to move up, because that's on our minds. And if we go into something where, oh, I just feel so awful, why do you feel awful? Let's bring it up. And
Mhm.
then people are able to bring it up, express it, and then they're clear and they're centered, um, and they're calm.
Mhm.
Now, one time it feels really great, but let's talk about continually doing 11 minutes on a daily basis, where we are conditioning our nervous system and starting to change out those neural networks, and not defaulting anymore to those difficult emotions that we can be addicted to because they've been with us for so long. And
Mhm.
so there is a perseverance involved. And I got to tell you that I've seen a trend in my work over the number of years that I've been doing it. And that is the people who are so haunted by their emotions are ready to do it. They want to come in, and they are just, they're can do. They are not just interested, because a lot of people are interested, as you kind of alluded to, right? Oh, I'd like to do this and I'd like to do that. But no, if you can come in and be committed, and it takes practice, just like anything. I mean, we talk about this as coaches, right? That any change in behavior means that you're going to have to practice. If you're going to if you're going to do a triathlon, you're going to continue to practice every day, doing all the necessary components to enter the race, and do a good job at it. Same way with working through these emotions. You're going to be committed to it, and the more committed to it you are, the more efficient and more effective the changes are going to be in your mind and your body. And well, soul, I danced a lot around that for a long time, but we've got to talk about the soul. And what the developer and creator of emotional liberation came to understand is that our difficult emotions are a bridge to our soul. And when we can move into that, because those of us who have been had a lot of trauma. It's really a fracturing. Trauma means that we have been, and shame, importantly, means that we have been fractured from our soul. And so, what we need to do is to reintegrate that, and that's a huge piece of this work, is the reintegration of liking myself with my soul. So in shame, we are uh, oftentimes self-hating,
Mhm.
loathing, and and over here, if it's a spectrum, and it's down here of self-loathing and self-hating, and self-love is here. Of course, our culture is all about, well, you have to love yourself. You have to love yourself. How can you jump from here to here?
Right.
You can't, and I'm telling you, you can't. That is a journey, little by little. And if somebody sets themselves up with commitment and an intent for success, they move along this to the point of where they do engage with that self love. We got to learn to like ourselves before we can love ourselves.
Yes. Yes. No, I appreciate that. And what I'm hearing from you is there's obviously the willingness needs to be there, but then the commitment in terms of committing to this lifelong journey, right? It's not one and done. And I think a lot of the times people are either looking for a quick fix, or if they've received some progress or have been able to make some progress, then they think this is it. But it is a journey and ongoing. And I'm sure we can both agree on that too, and have experienced it in our own individual journeys. But I do want to now shift to the psychedelic and cannabis catalyst work that you were talking about. And one of the first questions I have is, you see a lot of abuse with these plant medicines, as we can call them that, and it can have detrimental effects if it's not used responsibly. And then there's some, obviously, there's a lot of work still going on, research studies around how people are responding to some of these things. But what are your thoughts around the responsibility around the use, and then some of the research that's taking place, which can be conflicting around the use as well? So just wanted to get some of
Mhm.
your thoughts on
Mhm.
that.
Well, so in short, what we're finding out now is that the journeys that people take don't always turn you into a better person. What we're finding now is that, for instance, narcissistic personalities who are attracted to psychedelic journeys, trips. There's a difference for me in my work. If a psychedelic journey is a spiritual process, a psychedelic trip is just sort of recreational. But those people who are narcissistic become more narcissistic with psychedelics. Uh, so we have to be on the lookout for that also. And what I find in my work is that I have a framework that I bring in. So it's a container, if you will, the emotional liberation container. And the plant medicine or earth medicine, and I primarily work with cannabis and psilocybin, magic mushrooms, is that you put that in with everything else. So it is adjunctive. It's not the singular focus
Mm.
that so often is the case. So people, and you can go on Reddit, for instance, and look at the microdosing Reddit, and you'll see just all sorts of conflicting responses where, oh, it didn't do a thing for me. And microdosing is at a, what do I want to say, a sub-perceptive, although it is perceptive, but sub-perceptive. It's about 10% of what you would ordinarily take as a major psychedelic journey. But people will say, well, I didn't feel a thing, or, oh my God, all I felt was, the anxiety that was magnified, or I felt awful. And it brought up my depression. Or others will say, oh my God, it was the best thing since sliced bread. So it's all over the map. But we have to be prepared for anything, because, as I was saying, what these medicines do, these spirit medicines, is they amplify the emotion that we want to work with. So they bring it closer to the surface
Mm.
so that we can work with it. I mean, so often, let's take cannabis, for instance. I have people who come to me and say, you know, um, I can't do cannabis because when I'm in a group and people are, smoking cannabis, and of course everybody has like their own vape now since COVID. You don't pass joints anymore in a group, but they say, in a social setting, I just feel like I get sad and I need to leave the scene and I go somewhere and just sit, or I go somewhere and just cry. Well, it's because that that the cannabis as a spirit plant is calling for you to do some work. It's
Mm,
not going to be sitting around in a social setting shooting the shit. It wants you to do something more than that. It wants you to go through a healing process.
mhm,
So that's what we need to understand about these. And so let me just take the next step, because I work with microdosing both cannabis and psilocybin. So that would mean cannabis. When I'm teaching this process, people need to know that it's not about getting excessively stoned or high. It's and I have precise recipes, if you will, where CBD and THC, a combination of it, twice as much CBD as THC, for instance, and you know the percentage of THC. We have to be careful because we can get too numbed,
mm,
and that's what people often do when they're feeling crappy. They want to just get high and just be high. But
right.
that's not what we want to do. If we take too much, then we numb and we lose the opportunity to do the work. Now, the beautiful thing about these plant medicines is that if it didn't work out that time, then the next time you take less or you experiment. And my students say, tell me what's the precise, what is it? And I say, darling, it's all experiential. I
Mm,
can give you the basics for you to start connecting the dots, but this is self therapy and you need to find that sweet spot for yourself. I can be here, I can hold the space for you, I can coach you when you need, but you need to make that decision.
mm,
So when we're doing that work, that is different than a full-on psychedelic journey, and that's what I do in my retreats. Is the full dose psychedelic journeys with psilocybin magic mushrooms. But what I do first of all is teach people to be in touch with what they're feeling.
mhm,
And the beautiful part about using small amounts of plant medicine in that way is that you have control.
mm,
And in full on psychedelic journeys, you're to let yourself go. You lay on a mat, you have an eye covering, and you go in for 6, 7, 8 hours with this journey. And you let the medicine have its way with you. Well, that's a big difference from what I am teaching.
mhm,
But when you have a vocabulary and an understanding, both cognitively and somatically, about your emotions, it's not so frightening when you go into a full psychedelic journey and
mm,
things come up and you can go, oh my God, I see that now. That's what I've been working with, is that anxiety or that shame that came up from when I was a child, and so forth and so on. So I hope that I've uh, clarified clarified that whatever you do and however you do it with any of the plant medicines, it enhances the process of neuroplasticity, and that's the
yeah,
ability to form and reorganize synaptic connections
for
in the
sure.
brain that develops the new patterns of thought
Yes.
and behavior. So there
Yeah,
you go.
yeah, no, no, thank you for that. And there is risk though, right? So I do want to highlight that risk, which goes back to that response, using it responsibly. And I appreciate you providing that distinction between trip versus journey. But the responsibility comes back here where some people can be prone to psychosis, and you hear a lot about these experiences people have. And then to your point earlier, certain personality traits, if that neuroplasticity is happening or the synaptic connections are being enhanced, it might actually reinforce their personality disorders. So are you able to speak to that where there is that risk as well for certain people, and kind of knowing themselves and being a bit cautious around some of that as well?
Absolutely. So if you are looking for an experience, it's very important to choose a facilitator who knows what they're doing. And what does that look like? that means being able to, and perhaps our listeners or our viewers know about set and setting. So the
Yes.
set is, how do we go into it? Where's our heads when we go into this experience? And the setting is the environment conducive to
Yes.
this work? And so what I do as a facilitator, and I can just speak to what I do, is I have that whole thing set up. When somebody comes in and does work with me, and I love group work. I think that we actually advance faster when we're able to do sharing. And I know it's a whole big thing for you folks who have social anxiety. I was there at one point. But to be able to step up and muster all the strength you have to be in a group, and see, that's where my skills and my gifts come in, is being able to make you comfortable in a situation, in an environment, and that's very important. So what we need to do is work on introducing people and the group. For instance, if I'm talking about I have a retreat coming up here in a few weeks, where what you do first and foremost is you got a bunch of strangers that are coming in together, who have the same intention in mind, right, for healing, but
Yes.
they don't know each other, and that's kind of scary. And so for me, my work is to settle everybody down and create a very safe and secure and trustworthy atmosphere. And when that is there, then to be able to go into the journey, because we're setting you up for a productive experience, where, yes, perhaps anxiety will come up. And my work is like, oh, well, there's that anxiety. Okay, go with it, surf that wave. So what, oh, and there's been research done around this for Can, and that is that the more safe people feel, the better and more productive the journey is.
Mm.
So if somebody just takes a mushroom and nibbles off something and says, "Okay, I'm gonna do it now," without any second thought about it, they're leaving themselves open for issues. So in our work, I have the protocol is to be able to, a few days beforehand, to have a vegetarian diet. Don't take in any news. Do a news fast, because what happens is that like the day to 4 days out, whatever is in our mind kind of lingers. And if we're seeing violence, and we're seeing all the machinations of politics and the gruesomeness, and seeing war, and that's what's going to settle with us as we go into this experience. So yes, there is a stage to be set.
Mm.
At me as a facilitator, and for those who come, there's a responsibility for them to take care of themselves. And I always say that if you don't do these things, you may blunt the experience, and you may miss out on an optimal experience.
Yeah. Yeah. Or you may expose yourself to something that you don't necessarily want to be exposed to. And I think that setting piece is so important. And we've talked about this on different episodes as well,
Hmm.
because you could see the recreational use of psilocybin in the past or even now, where people go to a concert and that can have unintended consequences. But it's so important to, again, emphasize what type of information you're exposing to, because there's that consciousness aspect, right? What you're letting into your consciousness. And if you are then going on this journey, that may creep in. And exactly to your point, whether it's the news or even information and data that you surround yourself with, you're constantly exposed to it, which is impacting your consciousness. And I think when you're on those journeys, you're just a little bit more vulnerable because of the process itself.
And I particularly, like, I know a lot of people, go to South America or whatever and do ayahuasca.
Yeah.
I like psilocybin, because it's a fungi. It's readily available. I have here in Portugal. I have a grower, Dutch grower who lives not far from me, and he grows organic cannabis, and then he grows my mushrooms organically. He talks to them, you know, and so it really has good juju. I do believe there's something to that.
Yeah.
Um, and people go to festivals and go, well, gee, let me see. I'm just going to get. Can I say fucked up here?
Yeah, yeah,
you know,
sure.
I'm just going to go off the rails here, and they're doing anything and everything, and they have no idea what the stuff has been cut with. So
Mhm,
not only are they not set up for it with the set and setting, but they're taking stuff that is questionable.
mhm. Yeah, yeah. No, I appreciate that. But Becca, we've talked about quite a bit. How would you then tie and I think it's just to kind of center everyone, the emotional liberation with these journeys and kind of, I think maybe even starting with trauma and then that emotional liberation and how these journeys facilitate some of that. But can people experience the emotional liberation through the yogic science without getting into the plant medicine if they just wanted to experience that on their own? But how does that all tie together? If we were to kind of
Yeah, that's a very important question. And the fact of the matter is that my work, my emotional liberation work, can be done with or without outside substances. So I just find that a lot of people who find their way to me have these incessant ruminating thoughts and can't get rid of them no matter what they've done.
Mhm,
And so and somebody says, well, I don't know, we have so for our retreat coming up, we have a bunch of, um, we call them naives. And that's a scientific term where they have not had a lot of experience with psychedelics. And so they don't know. And for me, it's a very important, pivotal role to take good care of them. And so I always say that this work can be done with or without plant medicine, and people will come in and they will start getting comfortable and more secure without the plant medicine.
mhm.
And then they'll go, okay, I see what you're talking about in employing the plant medicine. And I think I would like to do that now. I'd like to try that. So there's no, you must do the plant medicine kind of thing. And of course, my retreats, they are headlined as sacred medicine retreats. So people who are intent on doing that will come to the retreats, but people who work with me in my masterclass courses and whatnot don't have to do that.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you for that. So this has been great, Becca. Thank you so much again for coming on the show and sharing your experiences and the work you're doing. Now, for listeners that would like to learn more about your work and understand how they can get in touch with you, what are some ways they can do that?
So it's a little, let me just digress for a quick moment. And that is, I have been working with plant medicine for intentionally for about 10 years now, and with emotional liberation. And as you may or may not know, social media does not take nicely to talking about plant medicines, even when it's for education, right? Or, I mean, I'm not selling anything. I'm not, selling substances or anything like that. But I have been shadow banned. I have been banned. My account has been deleted. I mean, all sorts of things. So I have everybody going to um, my website. And my website, easily enough, is just my name, beccawilliams.org. So when you head over there, beccawilliams.org, everything you need to find out is right there.
All right. Well, no, that's great. We'll put that in the show notes and hopefully you can get back on social media one day, but doesn't sound like
Well,
you're doing that
I
much.
am, but for instance, YouTube, like last year, claimed that my content was, I don't know, something wrong with my content because I talk about the plant medicine. And so they just basically only allow people who are already subscribed to my YouTube channel to see my videos. And so where I was getting, hundreds of new subscribers every month, now I get, 6 or 7. It's really eye rolling.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. That's too bad, but well, good luck with that, and thank you
Thank
again
you.
for all of this, and I look forward to talking to you again sometime.
Thank you for again. Me too. Bye bye now.